February 11th, 2025 is called to order. This is a public meeting. Minutes are recorded. The meeting is broadcast on Zoom and recorded for YouTube replay. Please turn on your mics. Public commenters, please step up to the microphone at your time. Please direct your comments through the chair and keep your comments on point and concise. Roll call today. We have Liz. Stephen Gold is out of town. He expressed a desire to participate via Zoom, but he might not be doing that. Ron Hawkins present. Bob Perkins present. Mark will be absent today. Richard is present. I am here. Susan is here also.
Liz? Okay.
So, Liz, today you will be the designated alternate. Should there be a vote? The agenda today, we have meeting minutes, which Mark produced for us. And curiously, he sent 3 months worth of meeting minutes. And I haven't communicated with him why he did that, but I looked at them. I didn't compare them word for word, but I believe it was the same ones for November and December that we already reviewed in January. So we have January's minutes. Does anyone have any comments or issues with the minutes that Mark prepared? No comments. The next steps he describes is review and consider Section 2 of the Harbor Ordinance regarding fishermen's floats. And yes, that is something we have talked about, and that is something that we will address at a future meeting. We have the committee annual report that needs to be prepared in March, and if any committee members have any input for that, I'd appreciate receiving that. And you can look at prior years' town annual reports for examples of previous Harbor Committee annual reports. Yes, Ron.
Did we move past the minutes? Because I did have
Discussing the minutes right now.
Okay.
Right here. What we did skip over is public comment, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
So I was just kind of doing a quick overview of the minutes for January's meeting. Is the committee prepared to accept the minutes?
Move to approve.
A second for that?
Sure.
Second. All those in favor of January's minutes?
Is there going to be a discussion?
Oh, we have discussion.
Oh,
I
yes.
think Ron has something to say.
It's just
Trying to find the right opening there.
Uh-huh.
I don't see any mention in here of us having taken a vote to send a letter to the town manager and the select board regarding the channel.
Okay.
I mean, I know it's in our agenda later to compose a letter to the harbor master. But I thought we voted to send a letter to harbor master, town manager, and select board regarding the bringing the channel back into compliance as is described.
Yes, you're correct. I recall that. Do others recall that also?
I recall a motion, and I'm afraid I might have made it, and I can't recall what I made.
Right.
Well, I think Elliot made the motion.
Okay.
I
Right.
remember the
You weren't here,
discussion
Bob. You weren't here, Bob.
Okay.
I know, I was going to
Yeah,
say, wait a
prior
minute, I don't
month that
recall.
we were-
talking about that.
Good
Yeah, you weren't
morning.
here last.
How are ya?
Okay. Well, then I will relate that back to Mark, that was omitted from the minutes. So noted. So we will table approval of January meeting minutes until they are amended.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to backtrack here. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment today at the meeting? Okay.
Good morning. I'm Michael Scaling, and I'm president of the Curtis Island Lighthouse Foundation. And I just wanted to kind of do an update on a couple of things regarding the island. We held Sunday before last, we held a community visioning session at the library, and there were about close to 40 people there, and the kind of the max we can have is somewhere between 36 and 40, just by the nature of the design. So we have a second session coming up this coming Sunday on the 16th, 2 to 4 o'clock in the library. And if anyone is interested in attending, you need to go online and sign up for it, just because we need to manage how many spaces there are. So if you go to our website, and it's www.curtisisland.org, you can sign up for it. There's an easy way to sign up. You'll be registered, and then just show up by 2 o'clock. And if registration gets overloaded, we'll just schedule another session in the next few weeks. So the first session, I think, went very well. We asked people to think about, after the place is restored and and kind of cleaned up and stabilized, what would you like to see? What if you left town and came back in 5 years and you went out to the island? What is it you'd like to see happening there? And all kinds of questions off that you can put into your own vision. So once we have the second session done, we'll summarize the compilation of statements that people have written, and share it with the public. But it's quite informational. The first session, there was a lot of energy around keeping it as natural, respecting the environment that's there, caution about overrunning the place with hundreds of visitors every day on a delicate marine environment. So it was really it was pretty neat what people said. And the other thing we're working on now is, we are going to be doing improvements to the buildings, and we have the study that was done and it's been published. And again, that's on our website, and I'm going to get a copy over to the library. But it was a joint study that the town and the foundation funded at the end, well, it was last year. We received it in July, and it really documented sort of all the areas that need to be fixed, repaired on all 4 of the structures on the building. And so that proposal, not proposal, but that study kind of forms the basis of where we're going. And right now we're working on an addendum to the agreement we have with the town. And it's in kind of a draft mode at this point, but hopefully we'll have a new agreement with the town in terms of how we're proceeding with the access issue, which is a big issue, and and what we focus on going forward. I think we're going to follow the plan, which talks about urgent areas, and these are areas that if they're not fixed or preserved, there's going to be additional water damage. And I heard indirectly, and I haven't documented it yet, but in one of these last windstorms, we lost more shingles. And Jeremy, did you hear that, or did you? I think you.
I did hear that. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that has happened.
Yeah, I'm going to see if Allison can fly a drone over and just see, if it's extensive or if it's just a few. But we know there are serious things that need to be taken care of. And so our focus, what we're suggesting to the town, will be focusing on the light tower and focusing on the caretaker's house and making sure there's not further damage due to water intrusion or rust as it happens on the lantern, the top of the light tower. And so going after the things that are urgent that could cost us a lot of money if we don't pay attention to them. So that's, I just wanted to give an update. That's where we are. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to respond.
The meeting Sunday is essentially a second version of the first
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah.
And this is Sunday, the 16th,
Sunday, the 16th, in the Picker Room at the library,
2 p.m.
2 p.m.
Okay.
And I just really want to stress, you need to register because it's, how many people will be there? The room can only hold so many. And so register, and if, when we come right down to it, if there are too many, we'll just let people know and see if, would you mind coming to another session, which will be fine.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the Harbor Committee member who accepted the responsibility to be the liaison
Ron,
To
Don,
the,
Steve, Stephen.
to the Lighthouse organization is not present.
Yeah.
And he won't be able to
Yeah.
attend. Is there a Zoom for that meeting?
No, there won't be because there's no way to participate at this point. So there's not a Zoom. Yeah.
All right, so
Yeah.
we won't be able to get him
Yeah.
listed for
Yeah.
that then.
Yeah.
Is it going to be recorded?
We're recording, I think this one we'll try to record, but there's so much work at each of the 5 different tables that happen. So the design of it doesn't lend itself to easy recording.
Mhm.
But we'll again summarize, and the foundation's looking at other ways to kind of get information out to people around a survey or around, where people's thoughts are on it.
So will the foundation issue a follow-up
Yeah,
to these meetings?
yes,
Some kind of
Mhm.
document or something?
yes. Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and I saw that Stephen wasn't here, and Stephen had sent me a note, and that's why I thought I would come in and provide an update.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's good. And so you have 40 people.
Yep, and I think we'll have the same amount this time. I think we have 35 or so already.
That's about the same number that attended the meeting last Wednesday, isn't it?
Yep, about the same. Yeah.
Wonder how many were the same people. Okay, very good. Well, Michael, thank you for coming this morning.
Michael, do you need a secondary drone operator?
Well, if someone wants to put a drone up above.
Can I
and
just give you a number of
Okay.
somebody who loves to fly his drone?
Oh, okay.
Might be able to help you.
Jeff.
You
Okay.
probably know Jeff, but he's constantly
Okay.
flying one, so
Okay, good.
make him put it to good use.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Okay.
Okay, Harbor Master is not present today, so he won't have anything to share with us. At our previous meeting, as Ron noted earlier, we want to prepare a draft memo to the Harbor Master and the Select Board and the Town Manager to describe the channel alignment objectives and our recommendations for that. And I had accepted the responsibility to do that last meeting, but I have been preoccupied with a personal issue and unable to do that. And I wonder if, Ron, you would be willing to create a draft that can be shared with the rest of the committee members that would summarize what we discussed last meeting, and so that we can present that. Good. And do you want to discuss that today further?
I think it would be good to get for me to hear other members' feedback if we just wanted to take turns and go around the table, just to sort of
Okay,
reach some level of clarity as to our perspective as a committee. I mean, I know what my perspective is, but
right, right. So last meeting, we had a significant discussion about the harbor channel to the northeast, and there was, I believe, a consensus agreement that the channel should conform to the specifications outlined in the ordinance. And there was discussion about how to accomplish that and what some of the issues are in addressing that, such as relocating of moorings. And one aspect of that is that the harbor master needs to notify the mooring maintenance and mooring service contractors about that, the need to conform to the ordinance specification, so that as they are working with moorings this coming season, have that in mind. And there was discussion about the location of the mooring the channel markers and the types of anchors that are used for those markers. Any other comments, recollections about our discussion last month? And we also might have discussed a timeline for accomplishing this. And I know that there was an interest in getting that done as soon as possible for the coming season.
that was my intent on bringing it up.
Liz?
I just have a little thing to say. You guys, my husband was on the harbor committee with Richard a while back, and sometimes if he's out on the water every day, so sometimes I'll ask him his opinion, and I asked him about the channel. And he recalls, this is just kind of information. It does not mean I don't, it's not really an opinion either way, but he recalls that there was a long waiting list for moorings. And I wonder if kind of the moving of the channel, he said there was some pressure to make those moorings come to fruition because of the waiting list. So that kind of overpopulation of the harbor that Tim was talking about. So I don't know what that means, but I'm just saying I know there's been the equitable turnover of Camden moorings is kind of a tabled item. And I know, he said in the past that was just something that had been brought up and that was put pressure to get some of these people off the waiting list, maybe by creating those moorings. So I'm just kind of throwing that out as information. I don't think it means we need to change anything about what we're doing. It was an interesting factoid that I found out.
So I hear you describe Dom's recollection that the mooring field may have expanded.
He used the word, there was a little pressure put on, I don't know if it was on Steve or, and I don't know who brought that up. So it's I know we talk about a waiting list. I don't know how long the waiting list was at that time. And, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up. I mean, I definitely think this is an important thing to do, but I just wanted to get some insight.
I don't know if this was part of the conversation at the last meeting, but what Liz is saying sort of leads into it, that I 100% think that the ordinance and the channel should be in alignment. But if someone were to say, yes, but it's the ordinance that we should change to get it into compliance so that there's moorings or whatever the policy decision might be. But was there any discussion about, no, that line is the line from now until eternity, or whether if the town decided, well, we'd like a different line angle, and we'll just describe it differently in the ordinance and leave everyone where they is.
I don't recall that being part of our
I don't think it
discussion
was.
last month of changing the ordinance to conform to the current mooring field. Does anyone else recall that? Ron?
Well, a couple of things. The channel is going to take up X amount of space regardless of where it's located. I mean, it has to have, it's described in the ordinance as being 75 feet wide and 1,200 feet long, or to the center of the outer harbor. So that's going to take up X number of square feet, or, regardless of what direction it's pointed in. I'm certain that careful consideration was given to the location of the channel when it was described by the Harbor Committee at the time. They described it as being where it was always traditionally observed to be. It just made sense that when you came through the Northeast Passage, you headed directly for the yacht club. It was just simple. And it needs to be predictable so that, and consistent, so that if I were to come back in 5 years and my memory told me that I could leave the spindle on the ledges at Northeast Point and head for the yacht club, I wouldn't run into anything if it was at night or in thick fog. I mean, we've had tremendous advances in technology since that ordinance was written, which allows you to just follow the little boat on the screen with your chart plotter. But it doesn't rule out the possibility that maybe your battery has malfunctioned or your chart plotter is down and you would like to be able to run a course from the Northeast entrance to the yacht club and be certain that you weren't going to run into a moored boat and in reduced visibility either at night or in thick fog, or the combination of the boat of the two, which makes it so that you really need to be able to know exactly where that channel is and not have it be a surprise to you that it's been changed. The point that Tim made about his approach, his assessment of why the channel is where it is now was a result of sort of happenstance, that moorings got placed, and then so we adapted the channel to fit that new scenario. I can't accept that as being a good reason for why the channel has been moved. It's more of an excuse than a logical, well thought out reason. I think that if there is anyone on the committee, and perhaps we should put it out to the public, that if there is any good reason why the channel should be moved from where it's described in the ordinance, then we should hear about that. I, as a professional mariner and a user of this harbor I won't count beyond my age of 10, but so that makes it 60 years. I don't see any good reason to change the ordinance in order to comply with some pressure that's been put on the channel as a result of a lack of management or placement of moorings. I think it should be the other way around. The moorings should be located in such a way that they respect that the channel is where it is described in the ordinance, and whatever pressure there is on the mooring demand for moorings. We just need to, it's a limited resource, and we need to somehow come up with a way to manage that limited resource in such a way that it's equitable for as many people as possible.
I'd suggest that the letter essentially articulate what Ron was saying, that if there's a suggestion that the ordinance should change to meet the as-built, that's a new question that should come back to us, because we'd have no idea of what that proposal would be and the goods or bads of it. But if someone says, well, we're not going to move at moorings, we're just going to move the channel, we'd want to express an opinion about whatever they're proposing.
Okay, so Ron, will you prepare a draft of points for us to present in our memorandum?
Sure.
Will you do that?
Yes. So
Okay.
that won't happen until next meeting then, that we won't be able to have a,
But you can,
I'll prepare it
you
for the
can
next
share, your draft list with members prior to that.
okay.
Yes.
I have kind of a stupid question. So I like what you're saying, Ron, that you want somebody to be able to come in and know where they're going without having to, so say your navigation is down. You're looking at a paper chart, or knowing where, or just knowing by where it's been. So,
Or having made a note somewhere in your wheelhouse, you wrote it on the wall that the course from the northeast, from northeast entrance to the yacht club is,
so somebody coming from elsewhere, where do they think our channel is? Because I agree that I'm not trying to say I don't agree with you, but I also say, how long has the channel been how it's been? And now are we changing it? Now we're changing where people are used to coming
You mean
in.
the legal channel or the as-built?
The legal, so as built right now, if we change that to the legal channel, then we're taking away that predictability that's been for how many years?
Who knows?
well,
20, 30.
I don't know.
So that,
With the as-built,
I'm just
I
kind of,
don't know
yeah,
the beginning.
I'm
point
just
yet.
kind of throwing that out there. So we have this kind of, yes, we want it written down as a certain way in the ordinance, but obviously somebody coming into Camden isn't opening the ordinance and looking at, they're looking at what is out in the harbor. And we have somebody coming into Camden, you said, come 5 years later. If we move the channel to the ordinance, we're actually being less predictable now. So I'm just putting the question out there. Just putting the question out there, and not to say an opinion either way. It's just kind of something to think about.
well, as I said, there were very good reasons for locating the channel where it's described in the ordinance. It was not just an offhanded decision that was made. I'm sure there was
Oh,
conversation.
I'm sure, yeah,
Conversation took place. I get your point, but
right.
so.
I don't know I'm
I
just
think
kind of.
if there were a good reason, then okay, we could consider that. But I haven't come up with one in
It's
my
just
own
like
mind.
changing a stoplight. If you change a traffic pattern, it's like, it's a little less safe until it becomes more safe, you know?
So can I ask what is on if you were to pick up a paper chart
That's kind of what I was wondering, Susan, yeah.
today of the harbor, would it reflect the changes that have happened as it exists now, or would it reflect as it's written in the ordinance?
They're privately maintained aids to navigation. They're not maintained by the federal government. So the can, the spindle, the beacon on the end of Northeast Point, the bell, both nuns are all right where they've always been on the chart. There's been no notice to mariners come out that shows that they've been moved. None of the light characteristics have been moved in my lifetime. So that's all very predictable and consistent, which is very important to navigation. And
So it's just the
The
encroachment,
inner channel does not show on the chart.
but it's
No,
the
it's not.
encroachment of moorings and that drift of the channel that's happened as a result of placement of moorings.
I'm not
that-
convinced that that's the reason, to be honest. And I don't want to put too fine a point on it, and it's a conversation that could take place maybe somewhere down the road.
Uh-huh.
I had communication with the harbor master. He informed me that he thought that he was at liberty to put the channel anywhere he wanted to. And I sent him, I took a screenshot of the ordinance and text that to him, and he said he's well aware of the ordinance. He helped write it. Okay, then he should be aware that the channel is clearly described in the ordinance and that haven't made any effort to relocate it at any level in town government.
Yeah.
So why isn't it where it's supposed to be?
Yeah, I really
What-
appreciate
whatever-
your
whatever-
clarification of that because I hadn't really understood the,
Well,
this,
Whatever caused this channel to be moved or to not have stayed where it was described in the ordinance consistently over the years,
Mhm.
that's up for conjecture. And until someone comes forward and say, oh, I know why. It was
Ron,
to
do you know why?
facilitate this or it was to facilitate that.
Understand.
We're not here
Right.
to create a history of why the channel is the where it is. We defined where it is and where it should be. And that's how we should address the issue.
I think Ron should write the draft, and as I take it, in March, we would approve and send. Is that?
Right, well, I suggest that Ron shares his comments and list of issues, bullet points or whatever with the committee members prior to the meeting so that we have a chance to look at it, consider that, and maybe get a final document prepared by the meeting. I mean, sooner rather than later, rather than deferring this for another month. Okay,
I mean, unless we want to write it now. I mean, it's.
no, I don't want to write it now.
Okay.
So thank you, Ron, for accepting that responsibility.
Well, the only reason I went into a lengthy explanation of the history was regarding trying to answer a question. So, like I said, I don't have an interest in pursuing why it got moved to where it is. My interest is that it get returned to where it's described in the ordinance. And then we can move on in a predictable manner and which will be good for everybody.
Okay, very good. And with respect to the next meeting, I propose that our next meeting be on Tuesday, March 11th, 4 weeks from today. Is everyone agreeable with that? Okay. The next item on the agenda is bylaws. I sent out a bylaw document, and are there any comments or responses to that? It is pretty much a boilerplate document provided by the town. That the sections are specific to the Harbor Committee. One, or Section 2, purpose. The purpose of the committee is to responsibly and ethically fulfill its mandate as defined in the Harbor and Waterways Ordinance, Section 108-6. Committee activities include regular meetings held monthly at 8 a.m. on the second Tuesday, reports from and dialogue with the harbor master, receive input from members of the public and town officials and staff, review, consider, and discuss topics as directed by the select board, review, consider, and discuss topics introduced by the public, town officials and staff, and members of the committee. Section 3, mission statement. The mission of the committee is to execute its duties and responsibilities in a manner that is fair and balanced for all harbor stakeholders and that reflects the standards of the community. those are the sections that are specific to the Harbor Committee. The rest of it is pretty much boilerplate, applying to all committees. And thank you to Stephen Gold for helping in preparation of those Harbor Committee specific statements. Does anyone have is there any comments?
Can I move to approve it?
You can do that,
I
please.
do.
Okay, motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second?
Ron, is there any discussion about the bylaws of the Harbor Committee? Very good. And all those in favor? Opposed? 0. Okay, and bylaws, I'll present those to Janice. And those will be our current bylaws, and that will be as of today, February 11th. So next item on the agenda is Harbor Resiliency and the report by Richardson and Associates. Last Wednesday, there was a meeting at the library in which Sanborn, what's his first name?
Blake?
Blake, yes, Blake Sanborn presented the Richardson and Associates report. And that was attended by 2 committee members, I believe. Liz,
1 hour, 19 minutes and 32 seconds of it.
you did? You watched it?
I watched it
All right,
yesterday.
very good, very
Good for
good.
you.
Well, okay, all right.
A stunned chairman.
Yeah, all right.
Doesn't know what to say.
Pat's
got us done.
Because the snow bolts.
Because I was going to propose that being an hour long, 19 minutes, that would get us out of here before 10 o'clock, is my intent. And I wondered if the committee would be interested in viewing the video of the presentation today. Also, I asked Jeremy to join us today because I thought he would be able to share some relevant comments about the report. And I'd like him to do that now. If you
Sure.
can
Sure.
provide something.
Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate it. So, yeah, we did have Richardson Associates and their partner WSP has been working on this since October. As you probably all remember how this all originated, we were originally going to do a redesign of the public landing to make it more resilient. And then we had those storms of last January. The state allowed us to pivot after all the destruction in the harbor and all the issues, especially with, 2/3 of the harbor. I don't know if that's exact number, but 2/3 of the harbor is privately owned. And a lot of it, especially on Bayview, is susceptible to sea level rise and storm surge based on elevations of buildings and lots. So Richardson Associates and WSP has been working on this. We had an initial meeting in October 17th at the library. That was the kickoff. And then we had 3 subsequent Zoom meetings with community group like Camden Can and the interested public. And then we had one for committees and staff. And then there was a third one for property owners, and just describing what the project was and what the outcomes will be. And then last week we had the kind of the second event leading up to their release of their final report. We do have a link on the town's website. If you go to the planning and development page, there's a whole link of things. So this video is on that website. You can click on it. You can watch it anytime. There's also a link to the a report that WSP did, kind of their reconnaissance of where sea level rise is and future impacts as we go out many, many decades, likely sea level rise. That's on there as well. Just go to the Harbor Resiliency Project on the Code and Planning portion of the website. we are winding down. They are finalizing their report, and what is going to be produced is kind of a toolkit that property owners in the town can use so that we and property owners can start looking at how they are going to address or should address or options to address sea level rise and their properties. It's a pretty significant issue. I think everyone understands that Bayview is particularly susceptible to sea level rise. And, you know, again, we're trying to provide a toolkit for people to just understand what the issue is and the impacts potential to their buildings and give them options that they can take to other consultants and engineers to make their properties more resilient. Happy to answer any questions about it. You know, I have talked, we are looking, another piece of this is looking at ordinances that we have that may limit property owners' abilities to adequately address sea level rise and storm surge. One in particular is the building height restrictions, and I've talked about this a few times. Lyman Morse, you know, when they, after their devastating fire and their project to rebuild, they would have liked to gone up higher than they could to make their, you know, elevation of their first floor. They would have liked to gone up 2 feet higher if they could have. They even could have gone up to 3 feet higher, but height restrictions limit them to go up. So one of the recommendations coming out of this will also be things that the town can do ordinance-wise to give people more opportunity to go up higher. And I think it's totally appropriate to do that. And I'm not going to, I would not recommend this in all the areas of where we have a flood zone, but certainly areas in the inner harbor and the outer harbor where we do have sea level rise issues. I don't want to do this a blanket across all the flood zones because we have McGuntuck Lake and the river are flood zones. So this is really focused on the harbor. At some point, you know, I don't know how much longer the waterfront and, you know, buildings on Bayview can continue to take the pummeling and the flooding that they're doing, that they're getting. So the hope is at some point those buildings and property owners will either try to flood proof their existing buildings, or if they're doing major renovations, bring those elevations up higher to get them up out of the flood zone. And again, this is like a toolkit and options. They did do, I think, a pretty neat, this is a concept plan for the harbor or for the public landing to make it a little more resilient. Again, these are just 30,000 foot view concept plans that they had for the harbor or for the public landing. So I wouldn't, I know there was some concern about the fishermen floats and the lift and wasn't taken into account. Again, they understand that fishermen are a critical piece to this, and a working waterfront is critical. And those are just things that can be addressed as we move forward. But it's really a adaptation plan that the public can use and the private, and public meaning the town, and private meaning private property owners. And we did go from the Bean Yard over to the Yacht Club with this study. I think there's a lot of good information in there. The final report should be done hopefully by the end of February. And then we'll be doing the reporting to the state, and then hopefully property owners can take that and use that as you know, something that they can try to adapt their own properties to make them more resilient. One thing I'm also looking at is the community rating system, which is a FEMA program. If your ordinance meets certain standards and changes, right now the minimum elevation you have to go above the base flood for finished floor is 1 foot. If we can go up to 3 feet when you do a substantial improvement or a new building, the insurance rates get reduced significantly. So there's things that we can do to try to offset some of the people's significant cost of flood insurance. And we know that flood insurance rates have been going through the roof every year for the last like 15 years. So we are looking at those kinds of things to give people relief on flood insurance as well.
Jeremy, may I ask, because so many of these reports get done and a lot of effort goes in, and what would be the most effective concrete steps? Is it having the planning board look specifically at code issues in order to
Yep.
really move this forward in a way? Because I know that there are a lot of sort of elaborate design proposals for Harbor Park and walkways and so on that I've seen in the plan, and I haven't. I'll plan to watch this, the presentation from the other day. But to make the best use of all of this expertise in order to have it codified, is the thought to take it next into the planning board ordinance review process?
Yeah, that's my thinking is hopefully for November of next ballot and election in November, we would have gone through public hearing process and workshops with the planning board on things that we can do on our side to give people more opportunities to make their buildings more resilient. So that's the process I would envision. Certainly we'll take input from the Harbor Committee and Conservation Committee and the public. I mean, that's the process. So, but it's my plan to take that report. And again, there's going to be some strategies from a zoning perspective on what we could do to help property owners. And those are the things that we'll be bringing to the planning board over the course of the next spring and summer. Is the plan.
Jeremy, you mentioned the final report.
Yep.
What's the timeline for that?
Should be we're hoping by the end of February.
End of February, and will that conclude Richardson and Associates scope of work under the current contract?
That would, yes.
Uh-huh.
I got an extension out to June, but likely it'll be February when it's finalized.
In your discussion here a while back, I thought did I hear you say the town would be giving a report to the state?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a product that we need to produce, and then I need to send them to the state gets a copy of it.
To satisfy the grant?
To satisfy the grant, but they also are looking for, they've never really asked for those, and those final products in the past, and they've kind of a lessons learned. They're looking for, kind of some feedback from staff that have been involved in these things on lessons learned through the process too, so that they can take our kind of the process we did and refine it, and give other communities, I hate to say toolkit again, but, what worked and what didn't in each of these projects, so that they're out there for communities to, act on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Please comment on what role you see the Harbor Committee having in moving forward on this issue.
Well, I mean, I've been thinking about that, Elliot, how best to approach it. I mean, your scope laid out in the Harbor and Waterways Ordinance is pretty, it's the harbor. So I think when we look at things like bulkheads and those kinds of things that you guys would review currently, right? There's a process for piers and structures and land attached floats and bulkheads. And so I think if there are recommendations from you folks or from Richardson Associates that come out of this, we'll need to run those through the Harbor Committee and take comment, and you guys will have a place in that process. Because if we need to tweak the harbor ordinance in some fashion, you guys would be involved in that, but you also are, intimately involved and aware of the harbor's conditions during storm events and all that. So I think your insight and your expertise and years of being mariners and understanding how the, harbor is and what the impacts from these storm events happen, your guidance and insight is always welcome and needed. I think every committee that has a finger in this, the Conservation Commission or the Planning Board and the Harbor Committee, I think all have a stake in this and should provide comments on these types of issues. I mean, I see the harbor, I think everyone does, is kind of the economic driver for this town. And I can't fathom if you took all those buildings, you look at it right here on Bayview, that are impacted by sea level rise significantly. If we took those out of the picture, our harbor would be very, very different. So we need to figure out ways to not only entice, but facilitate people to make some changes to their properties.
Bob, you have a comment?
Well, one comment from what Jeremy was just saying, because I don't think the Harbor Committee's opinion should stop at the water's edge, because I think how, for example, Harbor Park, how we're allowing access to the harbor so that we can effectively use it, et cetera, impacts the harbor. That doesn't mean that we are getting involved in, runoff issues, things like that. But the concept of how we get people to be able to access the harbor is something we should be involved with. But my question was just on the phase 2 along Bayview Street. I got the impression that they were talking about whether it's a bulwark or some sort of wall that went the distance across all these properties to keep the water from coming in. And I'm thinking, where is this thing going to go? Because there's piers, floats, et cetera, all along there. So is that meant to be inside of those piers? You take those out and rebuild them?
Yeah, I think just keep in mind that this is like a 30,000 foot concept plan. These are not engineered drawings. And the idea there is because there is so much, the town can do so much with our own property, right? But so much of this harbor, 2/3 of it is privately owned. And especially on Bayview where you have multiple property owners involved. I think they were looking to try to demonstrate a way or just a project where all of the different property owners could participate and be involved in the same project to make, like if certain, say, PG Willie makes theirs very, more resilient and maybe elevates their stuff, but the property owners adjacent to them don't, then it just diverts it there. So I think the idea really was to kind of look at them holistically. At the same time, you bring up access, and I think you're right about the Harbor Committee's role in access to the harbor. I think they're landscape architects, and they often think about access, pedestrian access, and the like. And I think that was kind of like the vision too. So built on top of making a whole run of properties resilient at the same time, and a way to do that collectively, you get more bang for your buck from a contractor if you're doing a whole project as opposed to piecemealing the project. Not only could you get more bang for your buck, but you could also potentially get everyone on board to provide a kind of a more inclusive public walkway along that. And I think that was their idea. It's kind of pie in the sky, and that's kind of what landscape architects do.
I didn't see it coming in the near term. But
Yeah.
I couldn't understand how you were going to have all the piers and this bulwark at the same time.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of involvement with a lot of partners and property
Is
owners.
it kind of like they have that in Belfast a little? There's like a walkway and then you have like these structures and the pier goes down from there, each separate, and they say private property, that kind of
Right,
a thing.
from the Armistice Bridge, right, all the way down to
I've
the
done,
heavy
like,
vessel lift.
the biking
Yeah.
down that, which
Yeah,
is great.
yeah,
It's a lovely thought.
it is. Yeah, you go from, their heavy vessel lift at I live in
Front
Belfast,
Street,
so at Front Street up to the Armistice Bridge, which is the pedestrian bridge that walks over the Passagesso-Waukeg River. You have that boardwalk that is public access, but it's private. But it also serves, like Liz was saying, it also serves floats and docks off of that. So I think that was the idea. Certainly our harbor is fairly narrow, so trying to facilitate all of the moorings that we have and all of that, along with float and dock access. I mean, there's a lot to take into account and a lot to consider. But again, I think the intent is really to try to get those property owners to think big, because it's going to require big thinking, I think, to try to get everyone on board with doing something on those properties. Every storm event that we have, like we've had in January, and we have them a lot now, Bayview's getting flooded. And if you look at the maps, future projections, Bayview's inundated. So, I don't know how long the town can just and the property owners can just say, well, we're just going to continue the status quo as is. At some point, Bayview's going to be a problem, especially with our infrastructure down there. So we need to start thinking about that.
So one other detail thing, I was interested that with them saying that, if you just had a normal parking lot down there, you'd have a lot more parking spaces. And which doesn't require any of the sort of earth moving and all. Have we given any thought to making it more of a standard issue parking lot than resulting in more spaces?
No, I don't think there's any of that considered. I mean, if you look at the landing plan that the TY Lynn did back, I don't know, was it 2010 now? They had actually looked at, and the downtown master plan actually looked at pulling more parking out of there and making it more green space. And I think that's what they were doing, is just kind of continuing that plan, because those plans have kind of been adopted by the town over the years. And, with the chamber going away, there's talk about, and that's the town's building, about the harbor master being stationed kind of up in that building, and then having restroom facilities and showers and things up in that building. So
I'm behind the 8 ball. Where's the chamber going?
No,
there is no
nowhere.
chamber. Chamber has
Really?
ceased to exist.
Poof.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
In the fall.
Yeah, I remember noting that somewhere. Okay.
They reached out for some major contributions and it didn't quite make it, I guess.
And what is the business group that succeeds the chamber?
Well, there's Cabbage, right? The Camden Area Business Group. They're still active. They're trying to get more folks involved. I will say I'm going to have the town join Cabbage. We've never joined Cabbage before. I don't know why, but it's a few $100s. What's that? Yeah. So we're going to join Cabbage and kind of try to support them. I know they're trying to get the word out. They have the first Wednesday of every month, they have their Connect Over coffee. I go to those. Those are very well attended. I think there's a need for a group like that in town. And I think they're picking up where they left off. Most of those groups were all part of the chamber anyway, and those businesses.
Where is that meeting?
Every month's different. It's in a different business. So like just this last Wednesday, it was at one of the climbing outfits, Equinox Guide Service, I think, held it. So every month's different. If you want to shoot me an email, I can get you that information. They send out maybe a week or two ahead of time where it's going to be. I can send that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, Susan, thank you for attending. All right,
Thanks, Susan.
Okay, well.
So
Go
I
ahead.
just had a question. The elevation with regard to the ordinance in terms of the maximum height of buildings is based on a measurement from average grade.
Yeah, well, yes,
And
generally. I'm going to say that with the caveat that the building height definition is like a half a page. So just let's say generally that's
Yeah.
true.
So we're faced with a situation where grade is terra firma
Mhm.
and not a level of potential water level.
Right.
So it's unfortunate that Wayfarer during that massive reconstruction couldn't have raised that infrastructure enough to carry them forward for another
It's true. I mean, I would say if you look at the reconnaissance mapping that WSP did, which is on the website, you can kind of see where the areas that get inundated the most. They're kind of more protected, obviously, than Bayview. But however, if you take it out 75 years or 80 years or whatever, they're in trouble. And so there are things that that get implemented when storms come, especially, I think you've probably seen them down south, hospitals that are in critical areas. They have these large structures that get placed up around the buildings to protect it. I mean, those are ways to deal with storm events. I was behind the scenes, trying to advocate that Lyman apply for a variance for the height standard because of this issue. I probably would have been the first time in the state someone would have applied for a variance for height due to future sea level rise.
Well, they received one, well, it wasn't a variance. It actually went to a vote of the town to change the code to allow them to go above the height limit with that big building that they put up.
Well, it wasn't a variance, the code changed, so
That's
right.
Yeah.
I would have asked, in order to get a zoning amendment to voters, the process didn't line up right for them, building wise. They needed to get, operational. So, but what I'm going to try to look at is if you're in the flood zone, if you're in the harbor and in a flood zone, that you could go and you're going to do a substantial improvement or you're going to do whatever, you can go, I don't know, 5 feet higher or something than the current standard allows, just to facilitate people to go up to get their building out of the floodway. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. I know people are concerned about views of the harbor, but I have less sympathy for people on Chestnut looking down at the harbor than I do for the businesses and property owners that own these buildings on the harbor that are economic driver. We need to make sure that they're in a place that they can continue to operate sustainably and in a resilient way, and be a little less concerned about people's view from Chestnut to the harbor.
There are a fair number of buildings that won't have an issue because they're not built to the limit of height, so.
Yeah, but the height's really small. I mean, it's short on some of those properties. I'm just
Like,
saying,
you mean the code?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, what they're allowed to go. The max height's not great.
Yeah.
So.
but I mean, for instance, waterfront restaurant.
Yeah, waterfronts generally is.
Or the yacht club building.
Yeah.
They're-
But we also want to see, so I hear you, but at the same time, I think you also want to see the possibility for investment and different things to happen there. I mean, it'd be different if it was a 2-story building at waterfront or a 3-story building. I mean, those aren't bad things. That's investment and that's economic opportunity for the town.
Right.
So.
Jeremy, how is you mentioned the Bayview neighborhood being an economic driver. How is that quantified? I mean, when I'm looking at the photograph up there and I see the neighborhood from the yacht club all the way up to the public landing, yeah, there's a lot of businesses in there. And that's a significant part of our local economy.
Yeah.
I gather.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Are there numbers and studies done? No.
Well, yeah. How do you quantify what that is? How that neighborhood contributes to the local economy?
Yeah, I don't have numbers on that. That would require someone like us hiring like Camoin and Associates, which do economic studies on this kind of stuff. I mean, I think the reality is that it's anecdotal. I mean, you see the buildings, you see what the tax values of those properties are. If those aren't there because they can't be there any longer because they just get demolished, and that's a significant negative. Just in terms of property taxes, not even the economic, the other things that are happening on the private side. But it may be worthwhile in the future doing, Camoin is working right now on an economic impact study for the Snow Bowl and Ragged Mountain. So at some point it might be worthwhile, retaining them to look at the economic impacts of the harbor and these properties. just so we have those numbers and the data so that you can point to a report rather than just hearing me say it.
Well, Camden doesn't have a lot of commercial
We don't.
area. You look at the photograph there and you see Main Street and Elm Street
That's about it.
and yeah,
That's why people want to come here.
yeah.
True. True.
I mean, I just think when Jeremy was talking about the height on Bayview Street, if you make all of it like between the bank, post office, and the Bayview Hotel buildings, and you carry those heights down,
Right.
you got a whole different feel.
You do,
It's-
for sure.
It's not necessarily one I want to walk on.
No, totally agree. Totally agree. I'm not talking 3-story buildings down
I
there.
just think that there's always the trade-offs period.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing Camden has going, as Ron keeps saying, is the sort of ambiance of it,
Mhm.
as it is.
I thought it was really interesting, though. I agree, but I thought it was really interesting that he said the biggest point I took out of the presentation was if we do nothing, we're not going to have anything.
No,
Yeah,
we need to
yeah,
deal
yeah,
with the water.
Yeah,
And
but
it's
you know,
remarkable when
it's
you were
easy
talking
to,
about
yeah.
awareness. Like out of North Haven, there were 2 major docks, I think, probably done 10 years ago, and nobody gave a thought to raising the whole damn thing. They had to lift the casino class yacht club buildings up. They had to build all this stuff. And now you go down there and any of these sort of moon tides, the water is up to the supporting beams. It's like, wouldn't that have been easy? But nobody.
No,
in
totally.
Well,
the last 2 or 3
change
years
is
at the
hard,
most,
yeah.
Nobody took this stuff seriously.
Mhm.
So I thought that was really interesting that even though the change of maybe obviously we don't want those giant buildings, but some sort of change has to happen or we're not going to have any of that. So I thought that was
And what
really,
I'm thinking really, I mean, what I've been toying with is something like a 5-foot, you're allowed to go 5 foot higher than the current standard if you're doing a substantial improvement or a new build in the flood zone in the harbor. That's kind of what I'm thinking, because that gives someone that opportunity to get to that. Because if we did the community rating system, and that's a real long process to get approved by FEMA to do it, and there's a lot of good reasons to do it. You've got to be 3 feet above that current base flood. So, you know, you got to giving people at least 3 feet or 4 feet higher, that ability to go is really the most prudent thing to do. So I don't think I'd go higher than 5 feet above the current standard. And it could be percentage of a building too. You know, like we have that, like right now you can go 10% higher than the standard for things like, or 10% of your building can go higher for things like rooftop HVAC equipment or, you know, other protrusions rather than the building itself. So I think there's ways to do it that are smart, that also still would keep a view of the harbor. My point in that was not to try to do 3 or 4, 5-story buildings along Bayview. It was really just to demonstrate that we need to give people an opportunity. And Lyman was a prime example. If they could have gone 3 feet higher, they would have. And they wouldn't be in this situation that they're in now. I mean, that storm in January, I remember being over there at that corner, you know, where they have the access into their building, the boat access, and just seeing the waves lapping not far from us, you know, and this is like a brand new $30 million, you know, infrastructure, and the waves are lapping not far from us.
You know, it's not just the storms. I mean, I go
It's
by the
true.
Rockland Breakwater all the time on the ferry. And that, I don't think it's 25%, but it's a significant portion out by the lighthouse itself that is routinely underwater, unwalkable on, I don't even know if it's close moon high tides or not. And again, that was not something 10 years ago that you looked at.
Right. No, it's true. It's true.
Jeremy, can you cite any projection for sea level rise by 2100?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 4. I think
4?
2100.
I think it was like
3.9,
I think
3.8, something like that.
Blake presented, I think, data like that, but I'm just wondering.
And they do have those, if you look at the report from WSP, they do have what the, you know, by 2030 and 2050 and 2100, they have those graphically shown, overlaid on top of each other, so you can see them.
Mhm.
And those were for like flood events.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Because that was a little confusing. It looked like
Yeah.
that's where the baseline was going to be.
yeah. What was pretty remarkable about those January storms, though, and people oftentimes say that FEMA's maps aren't right. The harbor, everything flooded almost exactly where FEMA had shown it things were going to flood. It was almost identical.
I don't know whether if the maps are wrong, is it because the prediction's wrong or because they didn't have the money to really track every little indentation on the earth. But this summer, there was a person talking with Haven from NOAA down in Falmouth, and she said, it turns out that the predictions of 20 years ago were pretty dead on. And the modeling they have now to go out is far more accurate.
Right.
So when they talk about 2 feet here or 3.9 there, how it affects the actual lay of the land might be a little iffy, but the fact that the H2O is going up is pretty reliable.
Yeah, and thankfully our maps were done in 2017, so they use LiDAR, and so our maps are pretty accurate. And instead, if you go like down to Owl's Head or other St. George, some of those maps are way off, and they weren't done recently. So thankfully our maps are pretty close. That first meeting we had, Pete Slavinsky spoke. I don't know if you know Pete. He's the state, I think he's a marine geologist, expert on sea level rise. He spoke at the first meeting. I'm still trying to get the video of that to post on here. That was a great presentation. He's talked a few times. Maybe I'll grab he spoke to the planning board back when they were talking peers, and maybe I'll link that just because I think it's very informative from a sea level rise perspective. He's an expert in this field, and Maine is unique, and I don't want to even go here, but the way the current comes up along the coast, right? The ocean current comes up along the coast, and the way it's not just sea level rise. It's like not just the level of the sea rising, but it also has to do with the currents that are driving the water towards the coast, and that's why we are experiencing such a drastic increase here.
Michael, you've probably thought about how four more feet of sea level and storm surge, what the impacts might be for Curtis Island.
Michael and we just kind of briefly touched on this the other day.
Yeah, I was at that meeting and really impressed with the quality of the report. And I know it's long range out and difficult to do. And I had wished that they had taken a look at the island at the same time. But my experience is the tower and the house are high enough that, I don't know what 3 feet will do, but they do get splashed. But the terrain around that point is fairly steep, and it sort of breaks it, but they do get splashed. And after the December 22 and then the January 24 storms, the light tower has an actual crack all the way around the top, maybe a couple feet down of the brickwork. And it seemed new to me. I don't know if it was or not, but there's some effects from high winds and also the water absorption into the brick that's happening on the lighthouse itself. On the light tower itself. So I don't know. It certainly wiped out and scoured and pulled the bank back where the stairs are, where access has been. And it took 3 or 4 feet of bank out in some places there. And that's definitely going to get worse.
Well, it's possible that increased sea level and the weight of that water will precipitate seismic events along our coastlines.
I think it's important to keep it in context. Those events that we had a year ago were extreme. And I'm not trying to downplay that there's the effect of sea level rise, but the combination of the tide level and the wind that we had created, and it just created
We got perfect storm.
a unique situation. I mean, the bell tower on Pemquid Point was taken out, so that's I don't think that's ever happened before. So I don't know how long that's been there, but we are talking about an event that we hope doesn't take place more than every 100 years.
I appreciate that, Ron. I'm just throwing this out there. We had 3 in 13 months.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the January,
changed,
100%.
yeah.
Then we added
So we
whatever was
we
March
should
or
be good
April.
for 300 years now. Right?
In
So
December
I get it.
22.
I understand it's not a, crystal ball is the only thing that's going to help us in terms of that. We could have,
And if that storm came in at a different time of day when the tide wasn't where it was, the impacts wouldn't have been likely what they are too. So
Yeah.
there's a lot at play here for sure.
is there, I
Well, if there
didn't,
wasn't a car coming through, I could have run that stop sign.
yeah, right. Is the conversation about and the employment of people to help us work our way through this, I think the obvious solution is we need to raise our infrastructure. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. It's not a mystery as to what needs to be done. The mystery is how are we going to pay for it? So if these consultants could help pave the application process for private enterprises to maybe get access to federal funding in some way, I don't know
Yeah, I mean, I've,
if that's even going to exist moving forward.
yeah, it doesn't appear that it is.
Doesn't look like that's a,
No.
But some of history takes a fair amount of time, although now it seems awfully quick to me. But if we're talking 75 years from now, we'll go back 75 years and think about what kind of businesses were here building these buildings, et cetera. So if you start to have changes that Jeremy was talking about, so that each change has to take this into account, then you look 50, 75 years down the road and you realize, well, actually an awful lot got incrementally changed just by being aware of it. It doesn't have to, well, in this 5-year period, we need to raise all buildings on Bayview Street to take care of a concern that's coming well down the road.
Mhm.
Well, somebody asked that in the meeting, is this something that's needs to all happen together? But it's just little steps of it.
I think it's little steps. I mean, the idea, especially on Bayview, is, I mean, again, you get more bang for your buck when you got one contractor in at one time. So if people can all work together and think about the improvements that they may want to do, working together is, I think, the best way to go. I mean, certainly the town is looking, you bring up our infrastructure, we're looking at ways to address our infrastructure all the time. I mean, we no longer have that in the harbor sewer line that was coming over, we got that out. Part of that reason is because of this, that we did that. So, now that goes up C Street or to Atlantic, and not up C, but up Atlantic Avenue with a pump station. So we're trying to do it when funding's available. The consultants did present to me a kind of a funding resource guide for projects like this. Oftentimes they're really for public properties only, unfortunately. But someone asked me at the meeting, are there things that the town can do to, incentivize property owners, give them a little something, give them a carrot to try to, take a bite and do this. And we're looking at ways to do that too. So.
Jeremy, including and from Lyman Morse along the shoreline of the harbor over to the yacht club, how many private property owners are there?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'm looking at the yacht club right now. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 right there, 9 or 10 before you get to the landing from the yacht club, I think. Right?
Yeah, all right, and then 3 or 4 residences over there.
Yeah,
Head of the harbor of Lyman Morse.
yeah.
10, 13, 15.
And then the condos, and then, yeah, and then the bean yard, yeah. So not a whole lot, really.
So,
But I was just thankful to be, I'm sorry, Ron, I was thankful to, at, the number of property owners that attended the meeting. I don't want to say I was skeptical, but I didn't know what to expect. And, people were engaged. I was able to reach out to those, the majority of them came when I didn't think they would necessarily. So I think people are understanding and seeing that there's an issue that they should be addressing.
Mhm. Well, as far as the harbor
I just-
committee goes, I think it's important that all the members be familiar with the concepts that were presented in this report, because that's the starting point we have right now.
Yeah.
For going forward.
And the adaptation toolkit, which is going to be one of the pieces of this final product, is really what kind of lays out steps that property owners can take, kind of incremental steps, and what you can do now, and what, kind of plan for the ultimate big fix. So I think hopefully people use that. And then, I mean, my hope in all of this was that this would at least start to, bring this attention to the property owners a little more, and that they can use this as a kind of a platform to dive into it deeper, and get their own consultants on board, and maybe retain some of the consultants we already have here working on this, because again, they have some existing data on these properties.
So Jeremy, in terms of the public landing, do you think the sketches and stuff we saw, the presentation, is going to be part of an immediate conversation about what are we going to do with the public landing, or is that type of change to the public landing, 5 or 10 years out, not in current conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, after the storm of December 2022, when it got, our landing got really devastated, and then we did those fixes that spring before the season started, in May of 2023 or whatever. And then the way that withheld and held up during those January storms was pretty, it handled it wonderfully, right? We didn't have any damage really. There was some undermining over near, the Smiths building there. So I think it's likely a little kind of further out in my thinking for the public landing itself, other than the harbor master building and figuring out how that's going to play out, and what that's going to be like, and what he really needs there, what the harbor master really needs there. I think the intent is to try to use the chamber building more. Obviously, the harbor master, I'm not a harbor master. I'm not on the water like you all. But do they always need to be right in that building that gets inundated every storm event? Do they need to be there? Is that where it needs to be? I'm not sure it does. Maybe it does. Can they do that work back in the chamber building, and be out there, in another way, closer to the water? I leave that to people that use the harbor day in and day out. It's not me, as much as I'd like to.
Gives them just much more of an accidental awareness of what's going on.
I agree.
Be in that building.
Sure,
Chamber of Commerce, it's
sure, I get that. I appreciate that. I figured that was the answer.
Oh, yeah, they're constantly, hey, get off of there, get off.
Yeah, yeah.
so you want them back in the chamber building.
But what I don't want to have
People who
happen is,
may come in and not know where they're.
yeah,
where they're-
what I don't want to have happen too, though, is, I mean, I don't think we should have much more than we have currently there, right? It gets inundated all the time, and you can't just keep throwing money at something that gets inundated all the time. So is there a way we can make that building more resilient than we should?
And then isn't there something else by the bathrooms? The pumps.
Yeah, we have a significant pump station
Yeah.
over by the bathrooms, and we have, yeah, there's other mechanical
So the
equipment in
rest
that
is parking lot,
bathroom.
which isn't
Right.
building, so it makes it maybe
Right.
a little less.
And I'm, you know, I know they focused a fair amount of their stuff on the public landing. I think that was because it's significant public property, so they were looking at it. I think things, you know, using properties in a way in the flood zone that allows the water to come in, flood it, and then the water recedes, much better than having a building come in, flood it, and then the water recedes, right? It's much better to have water inundate a parking lot or inundate park space, and then it goes away. But
Well, actually, particularly when you think about when most of that happens, is when the public landing doesn't have, if it's not being destroyed, water coming in on the parking area for a day and going out in January, who cares?
it's not a bad thing in January.
Yeah.
August would be a little different.
Well, that's kind of my point about keeping it in context, is
Mhm.
that we're preparing for an exceptional event, or are we making allowance for, in the way that we do it, that it could accept that exceptional event and still be usable for majority of the
Sure.
time?
I get that.
But it seems like it'd be simple enough to lift the harbor master's building 2 feet,
Oh, right.
couple of steps up into it.
Yep.
Ron, I think I'm listening to you and I'm thinking the word resilience. You know, you said accept that. Really,
Well, the Europeans have been dealing with this, not the sea level rise aspect of it, but infrastructure in places that are very vulnerable to exceptional events. And they figured their way around it. We're not,
So forward
I'm
thinking.
not sure why it is, but we don't seem to be able to make a long range plan.
No, we're not. We don't
Where the Europeans do.
think forward.
And pick a country. It isn't exclusive to Ireland or England or France or Spain.
The whole thing.
There are launching ramps in places where you wouldn't think it would hold together, but it does. And they stack their stones
I mean, part of our,
on edge rather than on flat on top of each other. And if they get moved, the stones tighten up on each other.
Yeah.
I mean, there are structures there that you just wouldn't believe they could exist in the exposed places that they're in. And they're accepting the sea that's come all the way across the North Atlantic. I mean, the coast of Brittany is incredibly exposed. So I think if we start thinking more in terms of, and it's not off topic, because we're spending money now to rebuild the launching ramp over here. And we're really not making it any different than it already was. We're using bigger concrete pieces, but they're not any thicker. I've heard it mentioned that they're 8 inches thick. They're not. They're 6 inches thick. So that's exactly what we have now. So what we're doing is putting down flagstones, which are, I mean, and I don't know what this magical anchoring mechanism is going to be, but I don't see screwing helical screws down into that riprap is even remotely feasible. So, and so here we are spending money to create something that probably isn't going to be any more successful than what we've been maintaining and fixing for the last 25 years.
yeah, I haven't been fully involved in that one, Ron. I will say that the design did come out of Massachusetts somewhere that had similar problems over and over and over again. And this is one that they use and have found resilient to some of these events. So I think it's just that one. A lot of our infrastructure, sewer, and stormwater was done 100 years ago, and it's like out of sight, out of mind, and we don't think about it. And at some point, it comes to roost. I think that's the reality. Same with, I hate to say this about Curtis Island, it's from here, a lot of people don't see the buildings there, right? Unless you're out on the water. And, we had caretakers that were, I think, doing an admirable job over the years, but it was still out of sight, out of mind for the people that sit in this building a lot. And unfortunately, I have a home that's built in 1903 and, it takes, you've got to stay up on things.
Time
And
hole.
yeah, so I think it's important to recognize, how we did things in the past, and maybe it's not the best way to continue, to make sure things are resilient and funding is spent appropriately.
Well, it's two different forms of approach. We're either going to just keep patching it or
Right.
make it more permanent.
Right. Yep.
And so, and until we, but it seems that it comes down to a conversation about what's cost effective. And it's difficult to take the approach that what's cost effective is something that's far more permanent than what
Yeah.
we continue to do
Yep.
over and over again.
And
I
we
mean,
do have to-
how much money and time has been spent on our launching ramp? And what would that have bought us if we had pushed all that money up into a pile and built something that would last 300 years? That's, and then someone asks, well, why would you need it to last 300 years? I mean, that's the question you get back.
I think that's the
When
thinking
you
that the
take that
United
approach.
States does all the time, right? It's like,
Yep.
why do we need it to last beyond my generation?
Right.
Doesn't matter,
Right.
it's not
Doesn't
gonna
matter.
affect me.
Right. The last 50 years, I'll be happy. Yeah. Yeah,
What
that's-
about your kids and grandkids?
Well,
right?
that's, we leave it up to them to
Fix it.
scrounge up some more money to fix it again.
I will say on Lake Beach, you probably want to know, Lake Beach was devastated, right? And so we are moving forward on, you talk about cost effective. FEMA gave us some funding to repair that. They're also now looking at hazard mitigation so that we can do something different rather than just putting them. It's like they'll give you money to put exactly what was destroyed back. Same material, same size, same dimensions. They'll give you money to do that. We've asked for mitigation funds to make, it's got to be cost effective from their perspective to do something different at Lake Beach. So we're in the process of working with FEMA, and we actually, WSP and Richardson Associates that worked on this project are looking at Lake Beach for us separately. And hopefully we'll have a design that for Lake Beach that we'll include in the budget this year, because we got to get that fixed. And I don't think, like you say, putting the stones back just the way it was is a solution over there, because this is multiple times over and over and over again. So
Rotate those stairs 90 degrees.
what's that?
Rotate them 90 degrees so that they're facing to the north.
Northwest or
West.
they're looking at
All work
all
the
options.
backside of them so that they don't take a direct hit.
Yeah, and part of the problem, though, to be honest, Elliot, is DEP's regulations don't always align with some of these things, and they're trying to be a little more, adaptable, and just their regulations, they're trying to address them, but some of the requirements don't allow you to, do what you're suggesting. But I think they're getting better, and it just takes rule changes at the state. So,
I'm seeing the clock on the wall.
sorry.
Do we need time on accomplishments? Because I gotta absolutely leave at 10.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry to keep
No,
going.
No, that's good, Jeremy. I appreciate you coming today and sharing, and you, Michael, also.
Reach out to me about cabbage if you want. I can share the link. Okay.
uh-huh.
Or anything else.
Thanks, Jeremy.
You bet.
Okay, so that's a big topic, as we all can see, and we're gonna have to deal with that in the coming months and years. And I encourage all the members to watch the video to familiarize yourselves with the comments or the concepts that were presented. And, some of them, as he described, they're 30,000 foot views. but they're ideas about what can be done to mitigate the hazards here. The last item on our agenda is Harbor Committee accomplishments for the town report. I've asked that the members think about what the Harbor Committee has accomplished in the last year. And Janice, last meeting, she stated what the time frame was for that. And what was that? Was it through June 30th of 2024? I'm not sure.
Oh,
It's the annual budget. It's the budget year.
But the annual report, it's my understanding that the annual report is published for the prior year. The report that's published this year will be for the year that ended in '24, I believe.
Yes.
So it's kind of old.
well, if we're really, so we're talking about what we accomplished up. Are we talking about we're about to finish the year we're talking about, or the year that we finished way back in the summer?
Yeah, the year we finished way back in the
Way
summer.
back in the summer.
We achieved a meltdown.
Take the, yeah, let's
That's
ignore it.
pretty much, I was going to say our accomplishment is that we've been reorganized and reinvigorated, period.
We survived.
Take the
That'll be a
minutes.
quick report.
Well, but without being official, the bottom line is I'm trying to remember exactly when, but it was about a year ago now that we lost a bunch of members and we lost a bunch of enthusiasm, and then we had to wait for the select board to get reconstituted, to rename, and now we exist and we have energy, but that's my gut feeling.
Take the minutes, plug them into AI and let it just,
I'm not taking them, but Elliot will. You're actually,
That's good, Richard. That's a good
it is
idea.
remarkable how I've started to rely on the AI summary of the
light.
Google search. And for most things, it's pretty damn
right.
accurate.
Oh, the
I
little
tried-
beginning piece.
Yeah, the
that
little
has-
beginning, so the
I
summary,
agree.
and you realize, and then you go down, you realize
I found myself looking at that too.
all the time.
yes, and I try to avoid it, but
It's
it's getting harder. Yeah.
'Cause it
looks-
you
and
can
then I-
always-
I-
you can read it in 10 seconds.
I actually read my medical records that were electronically created, and then of course the doctor reads it. But I thought, this is the first time I've read the notes where they didn't get something wrong. And it's like, yikes.
Mhm.
I'm actually in favor of this. I'm not in favor of it doing the diagnosis, but in terms of articulating what was said during the meeting, it's ridiculous.
Well, one thing the committee did in the spring of last year was the Lyman Morse dock extension. And our discussions and site visit, and we did
Right.
make recommendations to the select board regarding that.
Yep.
So I'd have to
I
go back.
fit the time frame pretty directly.
Yeah, all right. I'll go back through my notes for, from June 30th of 2023 to June 30th of 24 and see what I can come up with. And I'll share them with you. So that completes our agenda
Good.
for today. Thank you for attending, and Ron, thank you for taking on that harbor alignment issue.
Allowing myself to get volunteered.
Voluntold, I like
Right.
to call it.
Voluntold, yeah.
I'm told. I appreciate that very much.
Well, I appreciate the
artwork?
consideration.
I was gonna say, we're gonna need to frame your agendas eventually.
I drew a
We'll have an
Curtis. I
exhibit.
drew a Curtis Island this time. I'm
Like,
usually a
You can be in
doodler,
small wonder or something.
but I did a little Curtis Island. I'm usually a little weird doodler.
Okay, well, that could be a vessel of some
That was
sort.
sea level rise.
Oh, okay.
Which I didn't realize, but that's kind of what it
It's
turned
pretty
out.
amazing.
Well, I'll share with you, in
Oh.
one of the views that in the report, the fisherman's dock was gone. And Jeremy kind of addressed that a little bit, that it was gone. And I commented on that in the meeting. The day sailor float, that survived, but.
I think it was more of like showing the making the land higher.
Well,
they
it was
showed-
interesting to see how much more could happen down there.
I
It
thought
would be
was-
expensive,
I thought
but
it was
you could
really.
do a lot more and still have the same number or more parking spaces. But as Jeremy said, right now, there are probably more important things to take care of because it is withstanding things. And if Ron is right, well, that was well, it's a little sobering because the big storm had, well,
I'm
no,
not making a prediction, I'm just.
no, but I remember reading stuff too that said people don't quite understand the degree to which the January was a one-off. But a year before we had one, and 3 months later, or 2 months later, we had one almost as bad. So the underlying problem is there.
It didn't help that they were right after each other, but I thought it was really neat to see all that green space down there.
Photographs floating around. I almost think it was, I don't know who took it, but it's we always call it Sharp's Wharf, which is now Smith's Wharf.
Yeah.
Bayview Landing or whatever his name is.
And there was over a foot of water in that parking lot. Well, it was back when the water maker was in that slip.
That's a long time.
Before that slip got filled in. Oh, it was,
Right, when
I guess, late 70s.
Bernard was running the Bayview